In the heart of a busy city called Green Hill, where people walked fast and taxis honked loudly, there lived a young woman named Grace. She was only 24 years old, but everyone who knew her feared her. Grace was beautiful, with smooth dark skin, long braided hair, and fierce brown eyes. But she was also angry. Very angry. People at her office called her the girl with fire in her hands. She worked at a marketing company in a tall glass building. Her job was simple, answering phones and helping with small office tasks. But nothing about Grace was simple. Every man who tried to talk to her ended up with a swollen face or a bloody nose. It wasn't a joke. Grace had fists like bricks and a temper that could rise in seconds. Nobody knew why she hated men so much. People only knew that if a man touched her shoulder by mistake, or even smiled at her too long, she could explode like a storm. One day, a new intern named Kelvin offered her coffee. He thought he was being nice. "Here," he smiled. "It's from the cafe downstairs." Grace stared at him with sharp eyes. "Did I ask you for coffee?" Kelvin laughed nervously. "No, I just thought." Before he could finish, she poured the hot coffee right on his shirt and slapped him so hard, he spun in a circle and fell to the floor. Everyone in the office froze. Kelvin was taken to the hospital for burns. Grace went back to typing on her computer like nothing had happened. Grace had changed offices 5 times in 2 years. Not because she quit, but because she kept beating up her male bosses. One of them was Mr. Patrick, a tall man with a shiny head and a voice like thunder. He once tried to correct Grace during a meeting. "Grace, you submitted the wrong file," he said, frowning. "I submitted what I was asked to submit," Grace replied coldly. "Well, that's not what I said," he began. Before anyone could blink, Grace stood up, marched to the front of the room, and punched Mr. Patrick in the chest. He gasped. Then she kicked his shin and pushed him into the glass board. His glasses flew across the room. "You don't raise your voice at me," she said. That was the end of her job there. People started whispering her name around the city. "That Grace girl, don't mess with her." Taxi drivers gossiped about her. Hairdressers told her story as if she was a legend. "She's pretty but dangerous," they would say. "One wrong word and you'll end up in a clinic." Grace never smiled. She walked fast, eyes focused, and avoided crowded places. If a man stared at her in the mall, she would confront him. "What are you looking at?" she'd snap. Some men tried to flirt. They always regretted it. One tried to grab her hand in a bus and ended up with a broken wrist. She twisted it before the driver could even say, "Hey!" People were confused. They had never seen anything like her before. Some said she was mentally unstable. Others said she was simply wicked. But the truth was, no one knew what Grace had been through. And she never told anyone. The only thing she made clear was this: "No man will ever control me." She repeated it over and over, like it was a rule written in her heart. Even the police were afraid of her. A man once reported her for slapping him during an argument at the supermarket. When the police arrived and saw it was Grace, they hesitated. "She again," one officer whispered. "Yes, sir," said the man, holding his cheek. "She hit me." Grace didn't deny it. She stood straight and stared the officers down. "Do you want me to hit you too?" she asked calmly. The officers quickly backed off. "Sir, please, just avoid her next time," one told the man. And that was that. In Green Hill, men crossed the street when they saw her coming. Women admired her boldness but were also scared of how far she could go. She was like a ticking time bomb, walking through life with pain written all over her face. No one knew what had made her that way. But soon the truth would come out. Grace didn't like crowds, but she had to walk past a busy construction site one morning to catch a bus. She was wearing a plain black skirt and a white blouse. As usual, her face looked serious. The site was full of men, workers in dusty helmets, lifting bricks and iron rods. Most of them didn't notice her. But one man did. He was a young builder named David, with wide shoulders and kind eyes. As Grace passed, she accidentally tripped on a stone and twisted her ankle. She fell hard to the ground. David rushed over. "Are you okay?" he asked, offering his hand. Grace looked up at him, breathing fast. Pain shot through her ankle, but that wasn't what made her heart race. It was the way he stood over her, like he was trying to protect her. She slapped his hand away. "Don't touch me," she yelled. "I was only trying to help," David began. But Grace stood up, shaking with fury. In front of all the workers, she punched David in the chest and slapped him across the face. He stumbled back, shocked. "Keep your hands to yourself," she shouted. Everyone went silent. Some people stared in horror. Others just looked away, afraid to get involved. Grace limped away, her face tight with anger. Nobody followed her. And once again, the story of the girl who beat up a builder started spreading all over Greenhill. The edge of Greenhill lived a wealthy man named Daniel. He was the only son of a powerful politician. Some even called his father the king of the city. Daniel was handsome, soft-spoken, and dressed in neat suits. Everyone called him Prince Daniel because he acted like royalty. Unlike most rich boys, Daniel didn't chase girls or show off. He liked to help small businesses, organize charity walks, and visit old people in the hospital. He believed in peace, love, and respect. One afternoon, he sat in a quiet restaurant with his friend Joel. "Have you heard of the girl they call Grace the Hammer?" Joel asked, sipping his juice. Daniel smiled. "You mean the one who beats up men?" "Yes, I've heard the stories. They say she even broke her boss's nose once," Joel added, laughing nervously. Daniel leaned back. "I think there's more to her than what people say. I don't believe she hurts people for fun." Joel raised an eyebrow. "You want to meet her?" "I want to understand her," Daniel said, his eyes full of curiosity. It didn't take long for Daniel to find out where Grace worked. That time, she had just started at a new digital agency downtown. She handled emails and graphics. The office was quiet, mostly women, but the director was a man named Mr. Collins, and everyone was afraid he might be next. Daniel showed up at the office one morning with flowers and a gift box. He told the receptionist, "I'm here to see Grace." Grace was called from the back room. She walked in slowly, her heels clicking on the floor. Her eyes narrowed when she saw the flowers. "What is this?" she asked coldly. Daniel stood. "Hi. My name is Daniel. I've heard about you, and I wanted to say hello." No strings attached. Grace folded her arms. "You think I'll be impressed by flowers?" "No," Daniel said. "I think you've been misunderstood." Grace stared at him for a long time. Then she took the flowers slowly, only to crush them in her hand. The petals fell to the floor like torn paper. "Leave before I break your jaw," she whispered. Daniel gave a small bow. "As you wish." He left without another word. But something strange happened. That night, Grace didn't sleep well. She kept remembering Daniel's soft voice and calm eyes. He didn't shout, he didn't flinch, and he didn't fight back. That confused her. A week later, Daniel came again. This time, he didn't bring flowers. Just himself. Grace met him at the elevator and said, "You're brave, I'll give you that." "I'm not trying to impress you," Daniel said. "I just want to walk with you. 1 hour. No touching. No questions." Grace blinked. Then, for reasons she didn't understand, she agreed. They walked down to a small stream behind the city mall. It was a quiet place where water flowed gently and birds rested in trees. Daniel talked about books. Grace listened quietly. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't angry. Then, as they walked along the stones, Daniel tripped slightly and reached for her hand, just to keep balance. That tiny touch, something snapped inside her. Without thinking, Grace grabbed his arm and twisted it. Then she slapped his face hard. Daniel fell into the shallow stream with a splash. His suit was soaked and his cheek burned red. Grace was breathing heavily, fists clenched. Her body shook with fear and rage. Daniel sat up in the water, looking confused but calm. "I didn't mean to grab you," he said softly. But it was too late. She turned and ran. By the next morning, pictures of Daniel, wet and bruised, were all over the internet. People laughed, joked, and made memes. Even the prince couldn't survive Grace. "She's cursed. She needs to be arrested." But Daniel didn't press charges. He told everyone to stop spreading hate. Still, the city was buzzing with gossip. The mayor called Daniel's father. "This girl is dangerous. She embarrassed your son. What do we do?" Daniel's father, who was proud, said, "She must answer for this." So the next day, Grace received a letter. It had a golden stamp on it. She had been summoned to the city hall, the biggest building in Greenhill. Grace wore a long black gown and flat shoes. She tied her hair in a bun. As she walked into the large courtroom, cameras flashed and people whispered. Daniel sat on one side, looking peaceful. On the other side sat the mayor, Daniel's father, and other city officials. The hall was silent. "Miss Grace," the mayor began, "you are here because of your violent behavior, especially what you did to Prince Daniel. What do you have to say?" Grace looked around. Many of the people in the hall were men. Important men. Her eyes flashed. "I owe no one an explanation," she said calmly. Murmurs filled the air. The mayor frowned. "This is not a game, young lady. But we are giving you a chance to speak before we decide your punishment." Grace took a deep breath. "I have done nothing wrong. I defended myself." Daniel's father slammed his hand on the table. "He touched your hand." Grace looked him straight in the eye. "And who gave him permission?" The hall went quiet. Even Daniel looked surprised. The mayor cleared his throat. "You're saying you have a reason for all this hate?" Grace turned her head slowly. Her voice dropped. "Yes." And that's when she finally agreed to talk. Grace stood in front of the crowd. Her voice didn't shake. "When I was 10 years old, my father beat my mother to death in our home," she began. "He said she was too stubborn. She died in front of me." Gasps filled the room. My uncles, her own brothers, said it was her fault. They called her weak and stupid. After that, they started coming to our house, touching me, shouting at me, locking me in dark rooms whenever I said no. A tear rolled down her cheek. But she didn't cry. They said women must obey. They said pain is normal. That men are kings and girls must kneel. She stared at Daniel's father. I watched my mother die. I watched myself become invisible. So I made a promise, no man will ever control me. Not again. Not with flowers. Not with power. Not with lies. Silence. Deep, thick silence. Daniel lowered his head. So did the mayor. The only sound was the wind outside the tall glass windows. Grace sat down. And this time nobody told her to stand. When Grace finished speaking, the courtroom was still. Not a single voice. Even the buzzing of the air conditioner seemed to have stopped. Daniel sat quietly, his head bowed. His father, the powerful politician, couldn't meet Grace's eyes. The mayor kept adjusting his glasses, unsure of what to say. People watching online were frozen in front of their phones, blinking back tears or staring in shock. It was like the whole city had been slapped with the truth. For the first time, Grace didn't feel anger. She felt tired. Like a heavy weight had been lifted off her chest. Till part of her feared they would laugh or worse, ignore her pain. But something unexpected happened. Daniel stood up. He walked toward her slowly, his face soft with sorrow. And then, right there in the middle of the courtroom, he bowed deeply. "I'm sorry," he said. Grace blinked. What? I'm sorry for what I did. And for what all of us men have done. We never asked what you'd been through. We just judged you. For the first time in years, Grace felt her heart crack open, not in pain but in something close to warmth. Maybe even hope. That night, Grace's confession was everywhere. TV, radio, social media, online blogs, newspapers. Headlines screamed, "The girl who fought back. Grace tells her truth." Pain behind the punches. Some people were angry. "She still shouldn't be hitting people," they shouted. But others said, "Did you hear what she went through as a child? No wonder she fights so hard." A group of women started a campaign called #StandWithGrace. They wore black and walked through the streets of Greenhill with candles. They held signs that said, "Listen to her. Protect our daughters. Her pain is real." More and more women came out with their own stories. Quiet voices became loud. Secrets became confessions. Men who had never thought deeply before started looking at their mothers, sisters, and girlfriends with new eyes. Some broke down in tears. Others sat in silence, ashamed of things they had once joked about. Greenhill was waking up. Back in her apartment, Grace stared at the ceiling. Her room was quiet. Her bed was hard. And her heart was soft for the first time in years. She began to remember. Not in pain, but like a movie she finally had the strength to watch. 10-year-old Grace stood in the corner of a tiny one-room house. Her mother was lying on the floor, her cheek bleeding. Her father was standing above her, belt in hand, chest rising like a monster. "I told you not to answer me back," he roared. Little Grace screamed, "Stop! Please!" But he didn't stop. He kept beating. Over and over. That night, her mother died quietly. No sirens came. No neighbors knocked. Just silence and the sound of a little girl crying. The funeral, Grace's uncles shook their heads. "She was a weak woman," one said. "She should have listened to her husband," another muttered. Grace was holding her mother's photo. Something inside her changed that day. Turned cold. Turned angry. Turned into fire. When her uncles began locking her in dark rooms for speaking up, she stopped crying. When one of them touched her in ways he shouldn't, she grabbed a knife and sliced his hand. "I will kill you next time," she said, eyes burning. They stopped coming. And from that day, Grace trained herself to fight. She watched boxing videos, took martial arts classes in secret, and learned how to hit fast, strong, and without mercy. She built a wall. A wall no man could ever climb. 3 days after Grace's confession, a group of respected city leaders, men and women, held a meeting. They called it the Council of Healing. The mayor sat at the head. Daniel was there too, along with lawyers, teachers, social workers, and women's rights activists. "We can't just let her walk away without consequences," said one man. "Consequences for what?" asked a woman named Madame Vera. "Surviving abuse?" "She still used violence," the man replied. "But she was never protected, never helped. If the system failed her, how can we punish her for defending herself?" Daniel stood. "I don't want her punished. I want her protected. And I want the next girl like her to be heard before she becomes a storm." The room nodded. In the end, they agreed on something powerful. Grace would not go to jail. Instead, she would join a new city program that taught self-defense to girls while also teaching boys about consent, respect, and emotions. The program would be named the Grace Code. One rainy morning, as Grace walked home with groceries, a man appeared from the shadows. He was old now. Gray beard, wrinkled face. It was her uncle, the one who once hurt her. Grace froze. Her heart pounded. She dropped a bag of rice on the ground. He raised both hands in surrender. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. "I'm here to say, I'm sorry." Grace didn't speak. The man's voice cracked. What we did to you and your mother was evil. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope you find peace. Then he walked away. Grace stood still in the rain, her clothes soaked, eyes wide. And for the first time, she didn't feel like punching someone. She just felt free. Grace joined the city's new program. Every weekend, she taught girls how to defend themselves, not just with their hands but with their voices. She said, "You are not weak. You are not nothing. You are light." Boys sat in their own classes and learned that strength was not in fists but in kindness and control. Daniel often visited. He never flirted, never pushed, never demanded. He simply listened and helped. One day he asked, "May I walk you home?" Grace looked at him. Then she nodded. One afternoon, as she walked past a fast food restaurant, a drunk man grabbed her arm. "Hey, baby," he slurred. "Smile for me." Grace didn't yell. She didn't panic. She turned slowly and punched him. Just once. Enough to drop him like a bag of beans. Then she looked around. No one screamed. No one judged. Instead, a young girl watching from the corner smiled wide. "You're so brave," she whispered. Grace smiled back. Not with fire, but with light. Grace didn't want to become a hero. She only wanted to live without fear. But after her story broke out, something happened that even she didn't expect. Green Hill City started changing. People who once laughed at her became quiet. People who once judged her began asking questions. A teacher from a nearby school invited Grace to speak at a girls' assembly. "They need to hear your story," she said. First, Grace refused. "I'm not a motivational speaker," she snapped. But that night she thought about her younger self, scared, trapped, and silent in the corner of a dark room. No one had ever spoken up for her then. So the next day, she agreed. The school hall was filled with teenage girls in purple uniforms. Some whispered. Others stared. Grace walked in slowly, wearing a simple shirt and jeans. No makeup. No smile. Just raw truth. She stepped to the front and held the mic. "When I was your age," she began, "I learned how to punch before I learned how to trust." The room went silent. She told them her story, not the headlines, but the pain, the fear, the small girl with shaking hands who had no one to save her. By the time she finished, some girls were crying. Some stood up and clapped. A few ran forward to hug her. One small girl said, "My uncle touches me too." And that was when Grace knew this wasn't just about her anymore. Meanwhile, at City Hall, the mayor and council were making moves. A new law was passed. It was called the Protection Code for Women and Girls. It said, any man who hits a woman will be jailed without delay. Any child who reports abuse must be protected and heard. All offices must offer safety reporting for harassment. Boys must be taught respect and empathy in school. Posters went up across Green Hill with these words. "She is not yours to control. If she says no, it means no. Real men protect, not harm." The whole city could feel it. Something deep was shifting. And at the center of it all was Grace. Grace didn't ask for revenge. But justice came anyway. Her two uncles, the ones who beat her, locked her up and touched her, were found by police after her public story. One of them had tried to hide in another city. The other was working as a cleaner in a church. They were arrested, tried, and found guilty. Courtroom was packed the day of their trial. Grace didn't attend. She didn't want to hear excuses. She didn't want apologies. But the judge called her a hero and gave her a letter of recognition for courage and truth. It was the first time she ever received something for surviving. Daniel, who once just wanted to fix Grace, had changed too. He no longer tried to give her gifts. He gave her space. He no longer tried to protect her like a fragile flower. He protected her voice. One evening, He met her at a small cafe where she sat sipping water alone. He sat across from her, quiet. After a long pause, he said, "The first time I came to you, I treated you like a problem to solve." Grace looked at him, blinking. Daniel continued, "But now I see you were never broken. The world was just blind. And I want to learn from you, not change you." Grace said nothing at first. Then she nodded. That was the closest thing to a thank you she had ever given anyone. Boys in the city started changing. In one school, a boy named Michael stopped his friend from slapping a girl during a fight. "You can't do that anymore," Michael said. "It's not right." At a barber shop, a group of men were joking about women being weak until the owner stopped them. "Not in this shop," he warned. Grace taught us better. Even online, boys were asking better questions. Why do we think emotions are weak? Why don't we ever say sorry? Why don't we talk about our trauma too? It wasn't perfect. Some people still pushed back. But a seed had been planted. And seeds, when watered with truth, always grow. Grace changed her apartment. She removed the old hard bed and bought a soft one with pink sheets. She placed a small table by the window with candles, a diary, and a music speaker. On the wall, she hung a photo of her mother, smiling in a blue dress. Grace lit a candle every night and sat by the window. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she laughed. But now she felt safe. Not because the world was fixed, but because she had fixed something inside herself. And she had helped fix something in the world too. One night, Daniel was walking home after a late meeting when two armed robbers jumped out of a car and attacked him. They stole his phone, wallet, and pushed him to the ground. His head hit the pavement. He blacked out. The next morning, the news hit the city. Prince Daniel in coma. Grace rushed to the hospital. She had never felt fear like that. Her legs trembled. Her hands shook. Tears fell before she even saw him. He lay in a white bed, eyes closed, bandaged head. Grace sat beside him, held his hand gently, and whispered, "Please come back." "I'm not ready to say goodbye." She stayed by his side for days. And when he finally opened his eyes, the first word he said was, "Grace." She smiled. She didn't punch him. She cried. 3 weeks later, Grace was invited to speak at the Women's International Conference in Abuja. She wore a long emerald dress, simple earrings, and no makeup. Her hair was tied back. Her eyes were clear. The crowd was full of powerful women, ministers, doctors, judges, and students. She stepped up to the microphone. She said, "I was once a girl full of anger. I punched people not because I wanted to hurt them, but because I didn't want to be hurt again." She paused. "I don't punch anymore. I speak." And now people listen. The whole room stood, clapping, crying, cheering. She didn't cry on stage, but her heart did. And this time it was tears of light. Months had passed since Grace told the world her story. The city of Green Hill was different now. Safer, softer, but stronger. Grace had also changed. She still walked fast. She still kept her head high. But now her heart wasn't full of fire. It was full of light. She still wore black sometimes, but now she also wore red, yellow, and sky blue. She smiled more. She even laughed, real laughter, the kind that filled a room like music. At night, she didn't sleep with fear beside her bed. She slept with hope. Daniel had healed fully. His bruises faded and his strength returned. But something about him had also changed. He no longer walked like a prince. He walked like a man who had been broken and rebuilt with honesty. One Sunday afternoon, they sat at the beach, watching waves crash gently. Daniel didn't hold her hand. He sat close, but not too close. Then he said something that made Grace stop breathing for a second. He asked, "May I love you?" Grace turned to him slowly. "What?" He smiled softly. Not own you. Not control you. Not fix you. Just love you. As you are. Grace didn't speak for a while. Then she whispered, I don't know how. Daniel nodded. Then let's learn together. For years, Grace hated being touched. It reminded her of pain, fear, and danger. But something was different now. One evening, as the sun set behind the tall buildings, she stood in front of Daniel. They had just finished a walk around the city. Daniel was about to say goodbye. Before he could turn, Grace stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, gently, slowly. It was the first hug she had given anyone in years. She closed her eyes. And she didn't shake. A year later, Daniel and Grace were stronger, not as a couple only, but as individuals. They worked together in the city's outreach center. Grace helped women escape abuse. Daniel taught boys how to be better men. They lived in separate apartments but spent many evenings cooking and talking together. Then one night, Daniel asked a question. He knelt down. No crowd. No ring. Just quiet air and the sound of crickets outside. Grace, will you marry me? Grace blinked. The old Grace would have punched him. The new Grace looked deep into his eyes and asked, Will you still love me if I say no? Daniel smiled. Yes, because I didn't propose to own you. I proposed to honor you. She took a deep breath. Then she said, yes. They didn't have a loud wedding. No gold dresses. No rented horses. No fake smiles. Their wedding was held in a small garden filled with friends, flowers, and freedom. Grace wore a soft cream gown, simple and light. Her hair was braided with beads from her late mother's jewelry box. Daniel wore a white native outfit with silver buttons. They walked down the aisle hand in hand, not one leading the other but side by side. When it was time for vows, Grace took the mic. I don't promise to obey, she said. I promise to respect. I promise to speak. I promise to heal. Daniel said, I don't promise to rule. I promise to listen. I promise to support. I promise to never raise my hand except to protect you. Everyone clapped. Some wept. The sun smiled down. And for the first time, Grace believed in love, not the kind that takes, but the kind that gives. One morning, Grace was heading to the market when she saw a small girl standing by a fence, staring at her. She wore dirty clothes, held a cracked doll, and had tired eyes. Grace stopped. Hi, she said. The girl didn't speak. Grace knelt down. Are you okay? The girl nodded slowly, then whispered, My dad hits my mum every night. Grace took her hand gently. Do you want help? The girl nodded again. That day, Grace connected her to a safe house. The mother and daughter were rescued. And once again, Grace had passed on her power, not through fists but through love. With Daniel's help, Grace wrote a book. It was called Punching Shadows, A Girl's Fight for Peace. Cover had no face. Just a single hand, not in a fist but open. The book became a bestseller across Africa. Girls in Ghana read it in schools. Boys in South Africa discussed it in youth groups. Mothers in Nigeria cried while reading it in silence. And Grace? She stayed simple, quiet. She didn't chase fame. She said, Let the book speak. I've already said enough. Years later, Grace took a long journey to the village where her mother was buried. She stood before the small grave with fresh flowers in her hand. She knelt. Mom, she whispered. They tried to break me, but I broke through. She placed a photo on the grave, her wedding picture. Then she stood up, smiled gently, and walked away. Not with sadness, not with pain, but with peace. They say that legends are people who never die in the hearts of others. Grace became one. She was invited to speak at world summits. Children were named after her. A statue of a woman with her head held high and a book in her hand was built in the center of Greenhill. On the statue's base were these words: "She fought not to hurt but to heal." Before she passed away many years later, Grace wrote one last letter. It said, "If you're reading this, maybe you're a girl like I was. Angry, hurt, silent. Don't let the world turn your pain into poison. Let it become your power. Fight, heal, and when you're ready, love, but only the kind that doesn't silence you. With fire and softness, Grace."